You are dying right now. Every second you spend scrolling, hesitating, or procrastinating on your purpose, a piece of your life vanishes forever. You do not have time. Today, we confront brutal Stoic truths to shatter your illusions, stop the waste, and finally build the life you deserve. Brutal Truth 1. You are actively dying every single day, memento mori. We walk through life operating under a shared, collective delusion, the illusion of infinite time. We speak of our futures as if they are guaranteed contracts locked away in a cosmic vault, assuming we will always have tomorrow to start the business, fix the relationship, build the body, or finally become the person we know we are meant to be. We treat time as a cheap, renewable resource, spilling it endlessly into the gutters of distraction, mindless entertainment, and petty drama. The Roman philosopher Seneca, in his masterful treatise on the shortness of life, identified this tragic human flaw over 2,000 years ago. He observed that people are incredibly protective of their physical property and their wealth. If someone were to steal your money or encroach upon your land, you would fight them with a fierce, violent indignation. You would hire lawyers, you would build fences, you would go to war to protect what is yours. Yet, when it comes to time, the only resource in the universe that is strictly limited, absolutely non-renewable, and inextricably tied to your very existence, we allow anyone and anything to steal it from us. We hand over hours of our lives to angry strangers on the internet, to toxic people who drain our energy, to algorithms designed by engineers to keep us sedated and staring at glowing rectangles. The brutal Stoic truth is this: you are not moving toward death. You are already in the process of dying. Death is not a distant, shadowy figure waiting for you at the end of a long road. Death is happening right now. As Seneca wrote, "This is our big mistake, to think we look forward to death. Most of death is already gone. Whatever time has passed is owned by death." Read those words again, and let them sink into the marrow of your bones. Whatever time has passed is owned by death. The hour you just spent consuming mindless gossip, death owns it. The years you spent paralyzed by the fear of failure, refusing to take a risk, death owns them. They are gone. You cannot buy them back with all the wealth in the world. When you truly internalize memento mori, remember that you must die. It stops being a morbid, depressing thought. Instead, it becomes the ultimate filter for your life. It becomes a roaring furnace that burns away the trivialities, the anxieties, and the excuses. When you realize that the sands in your hourglass are slipping through the narrow neck, and you cannot see how much sand is left in the top, the petty insults of a co-worker cease to matter. The fear of looking foolish when trying something new evaporates. To stop wasting time, you must rip off the blindfold and look directly at your own mortality. You must wake up every morning and consciously remind yourself, "I may not go to sleep tonight. This day is a gift, and it is the only time I actually possess." When you live with this brutal urgency, procrastination becomes impossible. You no longer have the luxury of putting off your greatness. You build your life now, because now is the only thing that exists. Brutal truth 2. Nobody is coming to save you. Amor fati and radical ownership. Deep down, embedded in the subconscious architecture of our minds, many of us are still waiting. Not consciously, not in a literal sense, but in a quiet, persistent way that shapes our decisions, delays our actions, and dilutes our responsibility. We are waiting for a savior. Sometimes it takes the form of a perfect mentor who will recognize our hidden potential and unlock it for us. Sometimes it appears as a financial breakthrough, a lottery-like event that suddenly resolves years of uncertainty. At other times, it is more subtle. We wait for the right moment, the ideal emotional state, or a sudden wave of motivation that will finally make everything effortless. In this internal narrative, life is something that will eventually begin later. We are temporarily suspended in a prelude, believing that the real story has not yet started. This mindset is often reinforced by the stories we tell ourselves about our past. We become the central characters in a drama where our progress is perpetually delayed by forces outside our control. An unfair upbringing, an unsupportive environment, a system that seems rigged, a boss who did not recognize our worth, or relationships that failed to unfold as we expected. Slowly, without realizing it, we begin to inhabit the role of the victim in our own life story. And once that role is accepted, responsibility quietly dissolves. The Stoics had no patience for this form of psychological surrender. Their philosophy does not gently correct victimhood, it dismantles it. And perhaps no figure embodies this more sharply than Epictetus. If anyone in history had a socially acceptable reason to adopt a permanent victim identity, it was him. Born into slavery in the Roman Empire, Epictetus had no legal ownership over his own life. His body was controlled by another man, Epictetus, a harsh master whose cruelty is recorded in historical accounts, including the deliberate breaking of Epictetus's leg, leaving him physically impaired for life. By modern standards, his circumstances would be considered more than sufficient justification for lifelong bitterness. He could have spent his existence consumed by resentment, interpreting every limitation as evidence of injustice and every hardship as proof that life was fundamentally against him. Yet something in him refused to follow that path. Instead, he arrived at a realization that is both terrifying and liberating. No one was coming to save him. There was no external authority, no future intervention, no cosmic correction that would undo what had been done. The universe, in its silence, offered no guarantees of fairness. From this recognition, Epictetus constructed one of the most radical frameworks in philosophy, the dichotomy of control. He stripped life down to its essential structure and divided reality into two categories. There are things that are within our control and things that are not. Most of what people obsess over, social status, economic conditions, other people's behavior, past events, even physical circumstances, falls into the second category. These lie outside of our jurisdiction. However, there is one domain that remains completely sovereign: the inner world. Thoughts, judgments, choices, reactions, intentions, these belong entirely to us. This distinction is simple in theory, but transformative in practice. If you are waiting for someone else to change before you can be at peace, you are placing your emotional life in their hands. If you are waiting for ideal conditions before you begin acting, you are subordinating your future to uncertainty. If you are waiting for closure from another person before you can move forward, you are allowing their absence or indifference to govern your present state. In each case, control has been silently outsourced, and with it, personal agency has been weakened. Radical ownership, in the Stoic sense, does not deny that injustice exists or that suffering is real. It does not claim that external circumstances are fair or always manageable. Instead, it draws a sharper and more demanding line. Even if what happens to you is not your fault, how you respond to it is entirely your responsibility. This is where freedom begins, not in controlling events, but in mastering your interpretation of them. The Stoics also practiced what they called amor fati, the love of fate. This is often misunderstood as passive acceptance, but it is far more active and defiant than that. It is not simply enduring what happens. It is an intentional affirmation of reality as it is. It is the refusal to waste energy wishing the past had been different or demanding that life conform to imagined alternatives. Instead, it says, "This is the material I have been given, and I will work with it fully." A failed relationship is not merely a loss, it becomes material for understanding human attachment. A setback in career is not just a disappointment, it becomes raw material for discipline and adaptation. Even hardship, when viewed through this lens, is no longer meaningless, it becomes usable. Nothing is wasted unless the mind decides to waste it through resentment. At some point, however, this philosophy requires a confrontation with a difficult truth. Waiting is a form of avoidance. Waiting for rescue, waiting for permission, waiting for perfect conditions, all of it delays the only thing that actually produces change, which is action. The internal victim narrative must be recognized not as truth, but as a mental habit that reduces responsibility and postpones effort. To stop wasting time, one must eventually turn away from the illusion of external rescue, not with despair, but with clarity. There is no cavalry approaching. There is no guaranteed turning point where life suddenly becomes easier before you begin. The responsibility that feels heavy is also the source of power. When you stop assigning authorship of your life to circumstances, other people, or fate, you begin to reclaim it for yourself. In that moment, something fundamental shifts. You are no longer waiting in the story. You are writing it. And while the world remains unpredictable and often indifferent, your response to it becomes deliberate, grounded, and self-directed. The waiting ends, not because life becomes easier, but because you finally decide it no longer needs to be. And in that decision, real movement begins. Brutal Truth 3. Your anxiety is a self-inflicted wound. Look closely at your daily exhaustion. Most of it is not born from the actual physical labor you perform, nor from the tangible demands of your environment. Instead, it often comes from something far less visible and far more consuming, the endless internal conflict occurring within your own mind. You're not merely tired because of what you do. You are drained because of what you think about doing, what you imagine might happen, and what you repeatedly replay in your memory as though it still has the power to change. Much of modern fatigue is psychological rather than physical. You spend hours engaged in invisible battles, arguing with people who are not present, defending yourself against criticisms that were never spoken, and constructing elaborate scenarios of failure that exist only in imagination. You rehearse conversations that may never take place. You simulate disasters that may never occur. You revisit past moments, not to learn from them, but to relive them with different outcomes that are now permanently inaccessible. In doing so, you expend enormous emotional and cognitive energy without producing anything real in return. We are living in what can only be described as an epidemic of anxiety. It manifests not always as panic, but as subtle, persistent tension. A background noise of worry that follows you through the day. Fear of judgment keeps you from acting freely. Fear of failure delays your decisions. Fear of uncertainty prevents you from committing to anything fully. Over time, this creates a state of paralysis disguised as thinking. You appear busy in your mind, yet your life remains unchanged. Seneca offered one of the most penetrating insights into this condition when he wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." At first glance, this may sound like a simple observation, but it reveals a profound psychological truth. Most of the pain we experience in anticipation is disproportionate to the reality we eventually face. The mind, left unchecked, becomes a dramatist. It writes tragedies that rarely materialize and convinces the body to react as though they are already happening. Think back to a time when you anticipated a difficult conversation, a confrontation, or a potential failure. You likely experienced the emotional weight of that situation long before it arrived. Your body responded as if the event were real. Tension in your chest, unease in your stomach, restlessness in your sleep. You lived through the same moment repeatedly in your imagination, each repetition reinforcing fear rather than reducing it. And yet, when the actual event finally occurred, if it occurred at all, it was often far less severe than what you had rehearsed in your mind. The suffering in many cases was self-generated. From a Stoic perspective, this is not merely an inconvenience, it is a misalignment with reality. It represents a failure to distinguish between what is within your control and what is not. Anxiety thrives in that confusion. It emerges when the mind attempts to govern outcomes that are fundamentally uncertain. You try to control how others perceive you, how future events unfold, or how past mistakes might be rewritten in retrospect. In doing so, you place your peace of mind in territories you cannot govern. The result is inevitable: frustration, tension, and exhaustion. To live well, the Stoics argue, requires a decisive correction of this habit. You must become vigilant about where your attention is placed. One of their most powerful tools for this is the practice of premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of misfortune. At first, this may seem counterintuitive, even unsettling. Why deliberately imagine negative outcomes? But the purpose is not to dwell in fear. It is to strip fear of its illusion. Instead of allowing vague anxieties to linger in the background, you bring them into clarity. You ask yourself, with brutal honesty, what it is you are actually afraid of. You define the worst-case scenario, not in abstract, emotional terms, but in concrete reality. What if the plan fails? What if you are rejected? What if you lose something you value? Then comes the second and more important step. You evaluate your capacity to endure it. Could you survive it? Could you adapt, recover, or rebuild? In most cases, the answer is yes. Not easily, not comfortably, but yes. And that realization is transformative. It reveals that the fear was never rooted in impossibility, but in exaggerated perception. The monster that loomed so large in the imagination turns out to be smaller, more manageable, and far less absolute than it first appeared. Once this clarity is achieved, something important shifts internally. Fear loses its vague, formless power. Anxiety depends on ambiguity. It feeds on undefined threats. But when those threats are named, examined, and understood, they begin to lose their grip. The mind no longer wastes energy resisting shadows. It stops rehearsing imaginary catastrophes and returns to the present, where real action is possible. This liberation of mental energy is one of the most immediate benefits of Stoic practice. The time previously spent spinning in cycles of worry becomes available again. Attention, once fragmented across countless hypothetical futures, becomes focused. You stop living in constant rehearsal mode and begin engaging with what is actually in front of you. Stephen Aurelius often reminded himself to return to the present task without distraction, to treat each moment as sufficient in itself. This principle, when applied to anxiety, becomes a form of discipline. You do not deny the future, but you refuse to inhabit it prematurely. You handle what is real now, not what might be real later. Over time, this shift produces a quieter kind of strength. You no longer exhaust yourself by shadow-boxing invisible fears. You stop treating imagination as prophecy. Instead, you develop a steady orientation toward reality, one that is grounded, responsive, and calm. And in that state, life becomes not a constant negotiation with fear, but a series of present moments handled with clarity and composure. Brutal truth 4. Comfort is the quiet assassin of your potential. Modern society is, in many ways, a masterpiece of engineered comfort. We have built an environment specifically designed to remove friction from nearly every aspect of human existence. With a few taps on a screen, hot food appears at your doorstep. With another swipe, entertainment unfolds endlessly, tailored precisely to your preferences. Your environment can be adjusted instantly, temperature, lighting, sound, so that discomfort is almost entirely optional. Even boredom, once a natural part of life, has been eliminated by a constant stream of digital stimulation. On the surface, this looks like progress. It appears to be the fulfillment of a long-standing human dream, a life free from struggle, danger, and inconvenience. Compared to any previous era, we live with unprecedented safety and convenience. And yet, paradoxically, beneath this surface of comfort, something has gone deeply wrong. Rates of anxiety, depression, and existential dissatisfaction continue to rise. People are more connected than ever, yet feel increasingly disconnected from themselves and from meaning. The Stoics would not find this surprising. They understood something that modern culture often refuses to accept. The human soul is not designed for permanent comfort. It is designed for resistance, challenge, and growth. Just as muscles weaken without resistance, the mind and spirit deteriorate without struggle. A life that removes all difficulty does not produce happiness. It produces fragility. From a Stoic perspective, comfort is not harmless. It is deceptive. It does not attack loudly or violently. It erodes quietly. It gradually numbs the faculties that make a human being strong: patience, discipline, courage, and endurance. Over time, excessive comfort creates a kind of internal softness, where even minor inconveniences feel overwhelming. A delayed message response becomes personal rejection. A slight criticism becomes emotional injury. A small disruption becomes a source of disproportionate stress. The individual becomes hypersensitive, not because the world has grown harsher, but because they have grown less resilient. Stephen Aurelius, who ruled the Roman Empire at its height, understood this danger on a deeply personal level. As emperor, he had access to unimaginable luxury and authority. Every external condition of comfort was available to him without limitation. Yet he deliberately resisted the seduction of ease. Historical accounts and his own writings in Meditations suggest a man who often chose simplicity over indulgence. He wore plain clothing, lived without excess, and frequently endured the hardships of military life alongside his soldiers on the harsh frontiers of the empire. In freezing weather, under constant pressure of war and governance, he trained not only his body, but his character. He did not do this out of necessity, but out of principle. Stephen understood a truth that most people only discover too late. The moment you become addicted to comfort, you begin to lose control over yourself. You no longer act from strength, but from avoidance. Every decision becomes filtered through the question, what feels easiest, rather than, what builds me into who I should become. This is why the Stoics practiced what is called voluntary discomfort. It is the intentional exposure to manageable hardship for the sake of strengthening the mind. They fasted, trained in difficult conditions, slept on hard surfaces, and deliberately deprived themselves of luxury, not because suffering is inherently good, but because dependence on comfort is inherently dangerous. Through this practice, they trained themselves to remain steady regardless of external conditions. If one wishes to reclaim time, focus, and inner strength, then at some point, a quiet but firm decision must be made. Comfort cannot be the default setting of life. The path of least resistance rarely leads to a meaningful destination. It leads instead to stagnation disguised as ease. Growth, by contrast, always demands friction. It requires the willingness to do what is uncomfortable, unfamiliar, and sometimes inconvenient. This does not require extreme asceticism or rejection of modern life. Rather, it begins with small, deliberate acts of resistance against softness. Waking up when the body prefers to sleep. Choosing physical effort when rest is more appealing. Engaging in difficult conversations instead of avoiding them. Reading material that challenges your assumptions instead of confirming them. Facing responsibilities immediately instead of postponing them for momentary relief. Each of these actions is a small withdrawal from the comfort economy. Each one is a signal to yourself that you are not governed by impulse or ease. Over time, these small decisions accumulate into something far more significant than discipline. They form resilience. Eventually, something subtle but profound begins to shift. You notice that discomfort no longer intimidates you in the same way. Uncertainty becomes manageable. Pressure becomes familiar rather than threatening. You stop reacting to life as something that must be optimized for ease, and instead begin engaging with it as something that must be navigated with strength. At this stage, comfort loses its authority over you. It becomes a tool, not a necessity. And in its place, you develop something far more valuable: internal stability. You become someone who does not collapse when conditions are imperfect. Someone who does not require ideal circumstances to act, think, or endure. While much of the world continues to chase convenience, slowly becoming more dependent on it, you begin to move in the opposite direction. You voluntarily step into difficulty, not recklessly, but deliberately, because you understand that strength is never given, only built. In doing so, you stop optimizing your life for ease and start shaping yourself for endurance. And in the long run, it is not the comfortable who thrive. It is those who can remain strong when comfort is absent. Brutal truth. 5. You are what you do, not what you say you'll do. We live in the era of the perpetual student. The internet has given us access to the greatest libraries in human history, and as a result, a massive subculture of self-help junkies has emerged. You know this trap. Perhaps you are in it right now. You consume podcast after podcast, absorbing the wisdom of billionaires, athletes, and philosophers. You read the morning routines of highly successful people. You buy premium notebooks and spend hours meticulously journaling your goals, mapping out intricate 5-year plans, and highlighting profound quotes in books about productivity. You talk to your friends about the business you are going to launch, the book you are going to write, the physical transformation you are going to achieve. You feel productive. You feel like you are making progress. But it is a magnificent, self-deceptive illusion. The brutal truth is this: Consuming information about how to build a good life is not the same thing as actually building it. Planning to do the work is not the same as doing the work. Stephen Aurelius, despite being a prolific writer whose private journal became the defining text of Stoicism, had zero patience for theoretical philosophy that did not translate into action. He wrote a sharp, cutting directive to himself. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. This is the ultimate bottleneck for most people. They mistake motion for action. Motion is researching the best workout program. Action is putting on your shoes, getting under the barbell, and sweating. Motion is outlining the chapters of your novel. Action is staring at a blank page and forcing yourself to write 1,000 terrible words. Motion feels safe because there is no risk of failure. Action is terrifying because you are exposing yourself to the harsh, unforgiving arena of reality, where you might actually fall short. But reality does not care about your intentions. Reality does not care about your carefully crafted vision boards or the depth of your unexpressed potential. The universe only recognizes physics. It only recognizes what you actually manifest into the physical world through effort, discipline, and sustained execution. Stoicism is not a philosophy of armchairs and abstract debates. It is a philosophy of dirt, sweat, calluses, and scars. It is a practical toolkit designed to be wielded in the muddy trenches of everyday life. If you read Stoic philosophy and do not immediately change how you act, you have wasted your time. The gap between who you are and who you want to be is bridged entirely by brutal, consistent action. You must kill the part of you that craves the dopamine hit of merely talking about your goals. You must adopt a code of strict, uncompromising execution. When you wake up and your mind begs for 10 more minutes of sleep, you do not debate with it. You do not analyze your feelings. You throw off the covers and stand up. When you face a towering mountain of work, you do not wait for the muse of inspiration to strike. You sit down, block out the noise, and lay the first brick. You must recognize that inspiration is a myth peddled to amateurs. Professionals rely on discipline. They act regardless of how they feel. They understand that action actually precedes emotion. If you wait until you feel confident to act, you will wait forever. But if you act with courage, despite the fear, confidence is generated in the wake of your action. To stop wasting your life, you must drastically shorten the time between the genesis of an idea and the execution of the first physical step. You must judge yourself entirely by your output, not your inner monologue. You are not your thoughts. You are not your dreams. You are the sum total of your actions. If you want to change your life right now, in this very second, stop plotting. Stop preparing. Stop announcing your grand intentions to the world. Shrink your focus down to the single, most immediate task in front of you, and do it. Brutal truth 6. Your attention is being weaponized against you. Prososh. We are fiercely protective of our bank accounts. We monitor our credit scores. We negotiate our salaries. And we lock our doors at night to protect our physical possessions. We understand, on a primal level, the value of money. Yet, we remain blissfully ignorant of a currency that is infinitely more valuable, a currency that billionaires and megacorporations are currently mining from you for free every single second of the day. Your attention. The brutal truth of the modern era is that you are living in an attention economy. And if you are not ruthlessly guarding your focus, you are the product being sold. Behind every app, every social media feed, every outrage-inducing news headline, There are thousands of the world's most brilliant engineers and psychologists working tirelessly with one singular goal: to hijack your dopamine circuitry and steal your focus. They do not care about your dreams. They do not care about your family. They do not care about the business you want to build or the art you want to create. They want your eyes on their screens, and they will use every psychological trick in existence to keep them there. When you mindlessly scroll for 2 hours, you haven't just lost 120 minutes. You have given away your life force. You have fragmented your mind, shattered your ability to do deep, meaningful work, and allowed strangers to dictate your emotional state. The ancient Stoics didn't have smartphones, but they understood the immense peril of a distracted mind. Epictetus explicitly warned his students about this over 2 millennia ago. He taught the concept of prosos, which translates to a continuous, vigilant attention to the present moment and one's own internal judgments. Epictetus warned, "You become what you give your attention to. If you yourself don't choose what thoughts and images you expose yourself to, someone else will, and their motives may not be the highest." Epictetus. Read that again. When you wake up and immediately reach for your phone to check the news or social media, you are handing the steering wheel of your brain over to a random algorithm. You are letting the chaotic, panicked, and often toxic energy of the world flood your pristine morning mind. You are allowing the trivial dramas of other people to establish the baseline of your reality. How can you possibly expect to build a monumental life when your foundation is built on the shifting sands of internet outrage and cheap entertainment? The Stoic views attention not as a passive state, but as a laser. It is a tool of immense power that must be directed with intentional, conscious force. Where your attention goes, your energy flows, and your reality is constructed. If you spend your days focusing on the unfairness of the world, the success of your rivals, or the endless loop of political theater, you will cultivate a life of bitterness, resentment, and stagnation. You will become a passive observer of a life you hate. To stop wasting time, you must build an impregnable fortress around your attention. You must treat your focus as sacred ground. This means making brutal, uncompromising cuts to your daily inputs. Delete the apps that do nothing but drain your energy. Unfollow the accounts that make you feel inadequate or angry. Turn off the push notifications that treat your focus like a cheap toy to be interrupted at any moment. If you want to create anything of value, whether it is a thriving business, a resilient physique, or a profound relationship, you require unbroken, sustained concentration. You need the ability to sit in silence, wrestle with complex problems, and endure the boredom that precedes breakthroughs. Boredom is not your enemy. It is the fertile soil in which deep thought takes root. But we have become so terrified of being alone with our own thoughts that we immediately reach for our screens at the first sign of stillness. You must reclaim your sovereignty. You must practice prososhe with militant discipline. Before you click, before you scroll, before you engage in a meaningless debate, ask yourself, is this a conscious choice, or am I operating on autopilot? Does this serve the life I am trying to build, or is it a distraction designed to keep me asleep? When you learn to control your attention, you control your reality. You pull your energy back from the void of the internet and consolidate it into a formidable weapon. You realize that you actually have plenty of time to build your life. You have simply been giving it all away to people who do not care about you. Stop funding your own distraction. Take your attention back. Brutal Truth 7. You will be forgotten. Sympathia and the view from above. There is a phantom that haunts the ambitions of almost every human being. It dictates the clothes we wear, the careers we choose, the cars we buy, and the things we post online. It is the desperately fragile human ego, and its deepest, most secret desire is to be remembered. We want to leave a legacy. We want to be known. We want the applause of the crowd, the validation of our peers, and the assurance that our existence somehow mattered to the world at large. Because of this desperate need for validation, we waste decades of our lives playing a game we can never win. We build lives designed to look impressive from the outside, rather than lives that feel meaningful on the inside. We sacrifice our authentic desires on the altar of public opinion. We are terrified of taking bold risks because we are paralyzed by what our co-workers, our neighbors, or anonymous strangers on the internet might think of us. The Stoics have a cure for this paralyzing vanity, and it is perhaps the most brutal and the most liberating truth of all. In a relatively short amount of time, you and everyone who has ever known you will be dead, and you will be completely forgotten. Stephen Aurelius, the Emperor of Rome, was arguably the most famous and powerful man in the world during his reign. Statues of him were erected across continents. His name was spoken with reverence by millions. Yet, in his private meditations, he constantly reminded himself of his own absolute insignificance. He employed a technique known as the view from above. He would mentally zoom out from his palace, looking down on the city of Rome, then the empire, then the entire earth, and finally the vast, infinite expanse of the cosmos. From this vantage point, human affairs become vanishingly small. Aurelius reflected on the great conquerors of the past, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, men who burned the world down to secure their legacy. And what was their reward? They died, just like their mule drivers died. Their empires crumbled to dust. The people who praised them died, and the people who remembered the people who praised them died. Alexander the Great and his mule driver both died, and the same thing happened to both. They were absorbed alike into the life force of the world, or dissolved alike into atoms. Stephen Aurelius. If the Emperor of Rome recognized that his fame was hollow and his legacy was temporary, who are we to obsess over our reputations? Why do we allow the fear of judgment to dictate our actions when the people judging us will soon be dust, and their judgments will evaporate into the void of history? This is not nihilism. The realization that you will be forgotten is not a reason to give up. It is the ultimate permission to be free. When you strip away the illusion of legacy, when you stop trying to build a monument to your own ego, you are left with the only thing that actually matters: virtue. The Stoics believed that the only true good is a good character: courage, justice, wisdom, and temperance. If you will be forgotten, then you do not need to perform for the crowd. You only need to answer to the tribunal of your own conscience. This truth shatters the final barrier to building your life now. If the worst thing that happens when you fail is that people laugh at you, and those people will soon be entirely forgotten by time, then failure is completely toothless. The social anxiety that kept you paralyzed is revealed to be a ridiculous cosmic joke. You stop wasting time trying to craft a perfect image, and you start doing the actual, messy, beautiful work of living. You build the business because the process of building it challenges you and brings you joy, not because you want to be on a magazine cover. You love your family deeply and fiercely right now, rather than neglecting them to secure a future legacy that does not exist. You act with integrity and honor, even when no one is watching, because you respect yourself. And your self-respect is the only audience that matters. You are a brief, luminous spark in an infinite universe. Your time is violently short. Do not waste a single second of it living someone else's life, chasing the applause of ghosts, or shrinking yourself to fit into the narrow expectations of a society that will not remember your name. Step into the arena. Embrace the struggle. Reclaim your attention. Accept your mortality. The time for hesitation has passed. The time for preparation is over. The raw material of your life is sitting in front of you, waiting to be forged. Pick up the hammer. Your time is running out, but you are still breathing. The Stoics didn't dwell on death to create despair. They used it as a weapon to destroy procrastination, anxiety, and fear. You now have the brutal truths. The illusions are shattered. No one is coming to save you, and the only moment you control is right now. Stop waiting. Start building. If this message woke you up, hit the like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more relentless Stoic wisdom. Build your life. Now.